Jousef Murad is a mechanical engineer, AI and machine learning enthusiast, and podcaster based in Germany. He's interviewed over 70 people, mostly on topics of engineering and computer science. In this conversation, we explore some of the frontiers in mechanical engineering, some fundamental issues in artificial intelligence, and finally, talk about his journey running a successful YouTube channel. The links to his YouTube channel and other social media are in the description. So you studied mechanical engineering.
Correct, yeah.
What are some of the frontiers outside of computational modeling that you find are quite fascinating in mechanics right now?
Yeah, I think classical methods, like for example, we had subjects such as mechanical design, like the classical methods. When you think back, for example, where you didn't have like CAD modeling in that sense, where you didn't have like, well, you went 2D CAD and then you went 3D CAD to today.
I see.
And then back in the days, you basically had a drawing board where the designer was basically on a big board and drawing on paper. So that's still fascinating to me. So we learned the basic principles there. And then computational mechanics, computational simulation, that's something that's very, very interesting when we talk about AI or think about artificial intelligence. What's possible in terms of generative design? So how can I define new structures? How can the AI algorithm generate new structures or even new designs just by learning from past engineering data, for example? That's super fascinating.
So for a person doing mechanical engineering, understanding some AI and ML would be very beneficial because it aids
100%.
you in terms of design and okay.
100%. I wouldn't say that you would use machine learning every time for generative design, but I see that a lot of movement is going towards this direction. And talking about this, I saw one video which went viral on YouTube, which was why you should not learn machine learning. And I think it got like 300. There was like with a woman, and I think everyone saw that one. It's like 400,000 views. And I even saw in the comments that still in every field, you need a bit of AI understanding on like, what is AI, what can it do and what can it not do? Because what we have today, as you might well know, is artificial narrow intelligence, like very specific, very niche. And people think, yeah, this is kind of ex machina robots that have feelings, that can interact with humans. So I think we're far from that, at least from my perspective.
Artificial general intelligence. Actually, can you explain what it is and how it's related to the so-called singularity? Are those two different concepts? And if they're different, how are they related?
Yeah. So from my understanding and reading a few books on the topic is, so we have three topics basically. Artificial narrow intelligence is what we have today. Very niche, for example, reinforcement learning algorithms. How can an algorithm learn how to finish Mario, like the game Mario?
I see.
So if you take the same algorithm and say, hey, please drive a Tesla, like it probably wouldn't work. You would probably crash into a tree. So today's AI is basically kind of artificial narrow intelligence. Next step would be artificial general intelligence, algorithms that can operate on a human level. That means there would be also maybe good in other fields. So for example, let's say you're good in programming, but then the algorithm could maybe generate code by itself, but also could interact with elderly people. Like it could feel, it could empathize with other people. And then the next step would be then the singularity kind of artificial super intelligence, ASI, where we have like superhuman level, where AI is basically evolving so fast and reproducing itself and generating own code, like AI producing better AI and so on, where you're getting like this kind of loop where you cannot stop it anymore. This is basically superhuman level. This is what's most commonly referred to as singularity.
I see. So a singularity is a level above general intelligence, artificial general intelligence.
Yeah, there's a lot of dispute around that, but most experts say this is the singularity, basically artificial super intelligence, superhuman level.
Even if there is, or let's just talk about artificial general intelligence. I guess one of the differences that one could notice between natural human intelligence and the artificial one is that I would assume that even for the artificial general one, the human would have to give it a goal, and then the general intelligence can figure out how to reach that goal. But I guess perhaps one thing that is uniquely human is coming up with a goal. Does that sound, what do you think about that? So in other words, even if it's super intelligence, it doesn't have a goal of its own, or can it?
I think artificial superintelligence would be able to define their own goals. For example, how can this machine or this algorithm survive?
Any biological organism, from a virus to a human, the goal is survival. That's the fundamental goal. Yeah, so I guess even a human, we learn our goals from our environments, which perhaps the super intelligent agent could also learn from its environment what goal it should. So maybe it's not that unique to natural intelligence. In other words,
so. I
interesting.
think so. Yeah, I think humans in general, like we have like a biological goal. So you just mentioned it's like reproducing. It's like the primary goal, like how not to go extinct, basically. It's like reproduction, and then professional goals and things like that. But I think when we have a look at like the kind of hierarchy of needs, I think then maybe you could map it to AI goals. Like what is reproduction for an AI algorithm, and what is like fulfillment for an AI algorithm.
Exactly, because even the AI would have to survive. It requires electricity. It would have to find its power source somehow.
Exactly, yes. Exactly.
A couple of years ago, I took a ML course with Udacity, and I think you heard of it. And one of the questions that came up for me after the course, and I pursued it a little bit on different, like Quora and stuff, but I'm still not clear on this, is the following. Like in school, we learned this equation y equals mx plus b, like the equation to find the constants to find the equation of a straight line. In physics, in high school physics, we do experiments, we find some data points, and then we try to find the constants m and b so that we can, whatever x is, we can predict what y is. And one of the big questions for me is, all this artificial intelligence, even neural networks, let's say we have 1,000 inputs and it's a deep neural network with 100 levels or whatever. So is all of machine learning glorified y equals mx plus b, like regression, or am I missing something? Is there more to it than that?
It's such a simple question. And the short answer would be yes, but you have to be very careful. In my opinion, it is exactly what you said. It's basically function approximation. Right. So when it's like y equals mx plus b in a regression, like you have linear regression, then you would basically have this line, right? And then you define your loss function. How can you minimize the loss to each point that you have on your map, basically? Right. But then if you have like a very complex topology of your goal or your area you're looking for, basically, or the defined function, then it's so complex, multi-dimensional space. Of course, you need more layers, and you basically converge to an optimal solution. Of course, the loss would never be perfect, or the accuracy would never be 100%. Only like in weird cases, maybe you have a bug in your code. But it's basically function approximation. So whether I approximate a circle or like a spiral within a neural network, I can do that with as many layers as if I use, or like neurons, or So basically, to its essence, I think function approximation, nothing more.
Which is quite amazing if you think about it. In other words, driving a car from A to B, which like companies like Tesla are doing, it really just boils down to getting some data and finding those constants. Which is it's quite amazing.
Yeah, basically when you use deep learning or like image recognition, it basically comes down to matrix multiplication. So it's basically math, simple math. If you go to the deepest level, and then basically detecting objects and seeing, is that a tree? Is that a moving human being? So yeah, it's basically at the essence, it's math and like function approximation.
Okay, so now a couple of questions about YouTube and your YouTube journey. Were you planning to become a YouTuber for a long time? And what made you actually take the plunge and start being more consistent in interviewing people?
Yeah, that's a very good question. The thing is, someone else asked me that a couple of hours ago, the same question, why I went, no, that's a very good question though, because the reason being is that when I was in uni, I had professors. They were very good, but they were so good that they couldn't explain the simple topics in an easy to grasp manner. So that caused a lot of frustration. And I wasn't the only one, I can guarantee that. But of course, as a mechanical engineer student, you wouldn't say that to your peers. You would always say, man, that was easy, right? That was an easy exam, but where in fact, you know exactly, there was a damn hard exam and the lecture wasn't easy as well. So
sorry, actually, before you go on, can you explain that? I didn't quite understand what you mean. The easy stuff was hard to explain, and you wanted to explain it on YouTube. Is that what you mean? Or?
Exactly. For example, let's say we take a specific concept such as engineering mechanics. Okay. You have, for example, you have a lever and you apply force to it, and then you have a momentum. But the thing is, with some professors, they are so good, like they are so smart, that even when you ask them a question which is so simple, they try to go the complex path rather than explaining it in this very simple terms, like the Feynman technique, right? Like, how can I explain it to a 12-year-old? But then some professors would explain in such a manner that you were even more confused. Like you were confused, but then you were even more confused after you even asked the question. So my goal was like, how can I break down complex topics to easier to grasp, like presentations, or interview people, talk to them, pick their minds, what you're doing right now, basically. I pick your mind, you pick mine. I think that's super interesting, like interacting with people and basically making use of the pandemic. Like I could either sit at home, do nothing, or I could produce videos and like provide value to the world. So that basically two choices.
And did you ever consider doing videos in German, or was it obvious that you want to do it in English?
Yeah, that's a cool question. So for me, at least, I have to be honest, there was always this business mindset in the back of my mind, where I was thinking, okay, eventually I will generate some money with YouTube, whether it's like funneling into courses, things like that. I mean, the German market is that's also a niche for the German market. Definitely, if I would do engineering videos the way I do it in German, I would definitely also find my market. But I was thinking the English-speaking market is way bigger. So why not do it in English? And I would improve my English as well, because I'm not a native speaker. So why not go the English path? And then, of course, failing, uploading videos. Okay, the quality is a bit crappy. And then iterating, get 1% better in the next video. So this is how I got better over the months, years. Basically, we were forced to take one course, basically one language course in uni. And I took English C1. It was just a random English course. But even there, people were like kind of speaking English in a normal way. But I think, even though it sounds silly, but I learned English actually from playing online and finding like-minded people. Like, for example, when I play Dota, which is a multiplayer game, I meet people, and then when you open the microphone, you talk to them, and like your English becomes better because you actually apply the English language to gaming.
It's always best when you have a reason, just like programming, what people would say is, don't just follow a million tutorials, have a project in mind and do that. Find a project that you like and do it. And then you learn better through that. Yeah.
So actually what I would recommend, 100%, I would agree with you. Pick a project and work on it, and you will fail, but you will learn from the mistakes way more than just going through any tutorial.
Yeah, whether it's programming languages or human languages.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So you have a lot of, you've interviewed, I don't know, 50, 100 or so people, and some of your guests are really high-level people, like a university medical professor at Stanford. How do you get these people to come onto your podcast?
Yeah, I think you can see that in my podcast. Like when I was starting, nobody knew who these people actually were. And actually they were friends. Like I interviewed them about a cool project and I said, hey, that was so cool. Like the first one I remember was Atlantis Sea Colony. And I wanted to do like an underwater colony. It was my first podcast that I interviewed. It was such a cool idea. And I was actually asking on Reddit, hey, I wanted to start my own podcast. Who wants to be my first guest? And then the guys contacted me, hey, like, we would like to explain our idea to the world. I was like, okay, let's do it. And actually the first video was so bad, like from my editing skills. I was like, when I look back, I was like, oh my God, what did I do then? But then gradually, when you increase your number of podcasts and you become better and better, people will see it. And some people will even ask you to come on your show. And for those who don't ask, you just reach out. For example, I browse YouTube quite frequently. And I think you also learned it from Ali, the course, like going from that consumer perspective to a producer perspective. So rather than consuming YouTube, I'm like, hey, this is something that looks cool when I scroll through YouTube, or like, this would be an interesting guest. Let's reach out to them. Then I find their email address and just give it a spin. Like I can tell you from 200 emails that I wrote, probably 50 wrote back. So you get a lot of no's. For example, Bjarne Strustrup, like the inventor of C++.
Yeah.
I reached out to him and he was like kindly declining. He was like, no, sorry, he's very busy. I was like, okay, I'll try it again in 3 months or 4 months. So, but keep trying. Eventually they'll say yes, hopefully. So, yeah.
What about like I was just watching your video, your interview with Anne Lemke. How did that happen?
Yeah, Anna, that was quite easy.
Anna.
I just contacted her and I was like, I think it's a very interesting topic, especially for engineers.
Yes.
And when we talk about addiction and psyche and things like that. So I was like, hey, want to hop on my podcast? It's called Engineered Mind. So also the psyche and like addiction also plays into the role of like brain and like brain interacting with the world and external factors such as gaming, drugs, things like that. And she was like, yeah, okay, why not?
So just through email? Basically
through email, just introduced myself and said, I have this podcast called Engineered Mind in bold. So it was like, okay, mind, and then But then she was like, yeah, why not? Some people are very kind, actually, some more kind than you would actually think.
How do you use social media, be it Reddit, Twitter, Instagram?
Good question. So basically, recording a podcast, posting it then on my channels, of course, YouTube, and then distributing it across Twitter, LinkedIn, Reddit, not so much. I got banned in several subreddits for posting my interviews, which is okay. I mean, they own the place. I'm not the housekeeper, basically. And Instagram, of course. Yeah, from what I see is I think Twitter is a very good place to learn, and it's even better than LinkedIn. But I think for following great people, like-minded peers, I think Twitter is the way to go.
What would you say makes a great interview? And as an interviewer, what have you learned that you didn't know 2 years ago?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I love it. I think some things come naturally, because the first podcasts were horrible, where I was like, I had my questions laid out on the screen, and I was like, man, if I look now in this direction, people will notice it in the podcast. That I look from a screen, but actually, at some point you will feel that it flows. Sometimes the guest talks about something, and then a follow-up question pops into your head. You're like, I could ask that, or like I could ask 3 different questions. So I think being yourself is so important, and people will notice when you fake it. I noticed that as well, because you see some YouTubers, they are not themselves. They're pretending to be someone who they are not. And I think, for example, you are very natural in front of the camera, and you're asking me questions, and it flows well. And I think that's one of the, if it flows well, the audience will notice. If it's fake from the beginning, people will smell BS and be like, okay, this is kind of not a cool interview.
By fake, what would you mean? What would be a fake question? Or you mean like, what do you mean?
For example, let's say this would be not a podcast like you interviewing me about my YouTube channel, but you talk about any political topic, which is very, very sensitive. Could be, for example, Black Lives Matter. And now I have a specific worldview in my head, which is like, either I'm pro, either I'm against it. For example, let's say, I'm not taking any stance now, but in this situation in the podcast, I would have to take a stand. And then, even though my mind says, say this, maybe you basically resist the imaginary wave of people like who will maybe write you bad emails or say, hey, maybe, I see. You know?
So basically, you mean, I see. In other words, it could be a hot button issue, and then you might not be able to give your honest answer. You might have to give an answer. I see. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Basically faking yourself.
What is your basic setup for doing interviews? Like, are you using an external microphone right now and then using the earphones just for hearing, or are you using the headset's microphone? And what about cameras? Like,
this is a normal, basically the sound comes out here, normal headphones, very cheap ones, I think €5. This is the Shure SM7B microphone. I basically upgraded it from an NT USB mic from Rode NT USB. It was like €140 to this one, which is like $400.
Wow.
Because you need the microphone, you need a few other interfaces and cables, so it adds up to $400, something like that. And then as a camera, I have the Lumix G9. DC G9 actually. Yeah, that's the basic setup.
And so first of all, the microphone, how was there a noticeable improvement between this Shure and the Rode?
I think if you have very good ears, you would maybe hear like 2% or 3% improvement in terms of audio. But I think it's the small things the audience will notice and will appreciate, because when you improve your production value, they will even see the small things. For example, this small lamp here, maybe it looks cool, but if I would have turned it off, for example, with my smartphone, it would look a bit boring. So I was like, this is, for example, my channel color, this kind of synth wave, retro wave, kind of pink and purple color. And it makes things look more cool, and people will appreciate it and say like, hey, it's not that of a boring background, for example.
And so when you're using a DSLR like the Lumix that you mentioned, are you recording audio separately, or are they both going to your like laptop computer or somehow, or how is your, like right now for Zoom? For Zoom, obviously you have to connect your DSLR to your laptop, right?
That's a good question. Now that you ask me, I was anxious for a moment because I clicked recording and I was asking myself, is it actually recording the audio? But I think so. So the audio is separate, and the visual, basically the video, is separate as well. So 2 different channels.
And But I mean, in the case of Zoom, Zoom is making the recording is going to be happening on Zoom, or do you record locally as well?
I record locally.
I see.
Sometimes I use OBS for this particular case, because we started recording already. It didn't let me minimize the program once I started recording in Zoom, but usually I use OBS. It's a very lightweight application. It's not very heavy on your system. So OBS, and that's basically it. Very simple.
OBS is a software that takes the input from Zoom and records it. Is that what it is? Or?
Exactly. It can basically record your desktop. It can take audio input and video input. And you can even, for example, have it's basically for streaming. You can even have a donation button or things like that. It's usually for Twitch, people who use Twitch, but OBS can be used for anything. Classical education, just to display recording.
Another little technical thing. I like your thumbnails, look very cool. Yeah, how do you make your thumbnails, and what do you use?
I appreciate that question, because this is coming from a creator perspective. You ask me as a creator, how do you do your thumbnails?
Yeah.
And actually, sometimes my brain hurts by doing thumbnails, because I was sometimes I'm sitting at a thumbnail for 2 or 3 hours, no joke, because that looks cool. And then I wake up, I was this is so disgusting. What did I actually think? But I use Photoshop for a thumbnail design, and I have sometimes 10 to 15 iterations.
Oh my God.
And then I preview it. There's a special website, I forgot the name, where you can just drag and drop the thumbnail, and you would see how it would look on different devices. And maybe I can send it to you after the recording. And then you would see how it actually looks like. Sometimes an icon is too small, then I have to go back to Photoshop, make it bigger, save it, drag it in again. So it's a lot of iterations. But I think this is how life works, right? You iterate, become better, and then.
But the design itself, do you use pre-made templates, or you actually create those from scratch?
I create them from scratch, yeah.
Wow. Okay. In one of your early videos, you mention Patreon and Skillshare, and that was, I think it was 2019, so you were relatively new. For a new creator, at what point do you think they could use something like Patreon or get a sponsorship from Skillshare? How did you make those decisions?
Yeah, I think making that decision that early wasn't maybe a good idea, wasn't the best idea, or investment in time and energy, because first you have to prove yourself. You have to give to your audience a lot of free stuff before they actually consider or see that you put a lot of work into your channel, and they'll say, yeah, let me spend $1 or $5 to this creator. I think I should have actually used my energy and time more wisely in actually creating courses and generating passive income, rather than hoping that affiliates will come and click on my link and buy something. I think you need a big audience. For example, you need at least 15K subs and loyal followers who actually are interested in clicking on the link.
I noticed in one of your videos, you asked Ali Abdaal to comment on your channel.
Yeah, cool question. He basically did a live stream. I think he did. He was learning. He was learning. He did a live stream. I'm not sure what he did, but then I donated, I think, $4 or $5 to the live chat. Several, I think 1 or 2 times, or even 3 times. $1, $2, and $5. And then Ali was like, "Okay, you donated on several occasions. Now I'm having a look at your channel." He gave me Ali gives harsh feedback, but very good. He's not sugarcoating it, saying, this could be better. He's okay, this is crap. Change this. It seriously looks bad. And then I changed a few things here and there. It looks better now. Of course, I'm nowhere near Ali's level, but I'm trying to improve each video by 1% at least to get there eventually.
Very good. I think that's pretty much all I have. So yeah, thank you very much for your time. And I guess we'll be in touch.
Definitely. Yeah, it was a pleasure and nice questions. The one thing I'm probably not happy about was the ranting about what's the goal between humans and algorithms. I think that's a very complex question, but a good one. Maybe if I have a good night's sleep, I'll think about that in a bit more detail.